Me again. Today I wanted to cover something a little bit different, and that is to let you know that it's not just the Torah that's exact, but the Bible, the mystical portion of the Torah, which is the Zohar, the explanation of the deeper mystical areas in the Torah, and just about anything that we have in scriptures. Our entire Talmud, which I have a big copy of back there, is very, very much with such prophecy in it that has come true that you know that it couldn't have possibly come from people. Yes, people may have written that down, but it still is something that had to come from Hashem. Because only Hashem is not in time and sees everything that happens, is happening, and will happen, and knows all the future. So any predictions that you come across, prophecies, whether it's in Psalms, whether it's in any part of the Bible, doesn't make any difference. It had to come from Hashem. Yes, we do see sections of the Bible that were written by King David and King Solomon, but still, it's information that had to be put into their heads by the one who is of infinite time, infinite power, infinite everything. The only one who really knows everything that's coming up. So what I want to talk about today is some information in the Bible, and to point out that here again everything is exact. I could even mention, for instance, that the names of the prophets, they're not names that were just made up. Ezekiel is a good example. Ezekiel, in Hebrew, the actual name means God strengthens. Ezekiel was in a time that was very, very difficult. And as a result, for him to be able to get across to the people his prophecies, he needed the strength of Hashem behind him. So that's why his name became Ezekiel. God strengthens. Zechariah, God remembers. Also a situation where Hashem needed to help him out, and his name became God remembers. Daniel is God is my judge. And it's very interesting that Daniel is saying that everything that he does and everything that he tells us is really from God's judgment. It has to come from him. Daniel didn't know these things. It had to come from the Ein Od Milvado, we call it, which is there's nothing else. There's no other source. The names that I really wanted to get into and to analyze, ready for this one? Gog and Magog. Because there's been so much guessing about, well, who's Gog and where is Magog? Magog is the country, and Gog is the leader of the country, and it's been going back and forth. And it's Putin, it's Obama, it's this guy, it's the guy from Korea, the head of Korea, it's the guy from Syria. Please. As I was analyzing yesterday the fact that there is no wasted word in the Torah and that everything means something, I decided to do a pretty good analysis of Gog and Magog. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. It's not always easy to analyze a particular word or a name, because very often it's not just what you read, it's hidden information. You have to get into something a little bit deeper. Let's start with Magog. We can see from this chart as an example that the three sons of Noah were actually Yefes, Ham, and Shem. And the names of their children and grandchildren actually come down to the 70 nations that were really known at that time. Interestingly enough, each of these children, each of these sons, represents an area of the world. Yefes pretty much represents the area of Europe. Ham is pretty much Africa, and Shem is really the Middle East, but Asia is what we can probably say for Shem. This at least allows us to see where the different places are, because we do see that Yephes is where Magog, he was a son of Yephes. And as a result, we should be able to determine that Yephes is really the European countries and any country that broke off from Europe. The United States, obviously, was started by the British, the Germans, the French, the Spanish, goes on and on and on. The Dutch, I forgot that. Anyway, so we do have here a way of telling approximately where Magog should be. So now to determine that Magog is really the United States, we can do this by a couple different things. One is the fact that we are told it is the great power of today. That's who Magog is going to be. And the other thing is, by figuring out exactly who Gog is, then we could say we have a hint as to where Magog is. Why? Because if we remember yesterday when I was talking about Midaber, and I said that the mem at the beginning, that one letter means from, well, the same thing with Magog is it really is saying from Gog. So somehow the word Magog is really saying from Gog. Now I just need to figure out exactly what Gog means, who it is, and then that solidifies the country that we're talking about here. Since Hashem doesn't make up names, in other words, it actually is the name that he's telling us or hinting to it. In other words, you wouldn't find somebody being called Fred or Jimmy or BB. I thought that was a gun, a type of gun. But anyway, we are looking for some name that actually has Gog in it. This is why I came up with the name George, for other reasons too, which I'll get into. But the name George, if you look at the first, third, and fifth letter, you will see that it actually has in it Gog. But if you also look at it in Hebrew, you'll see that Gog appears in the Hebrew George, which is a Gimel Vav Resh Gimel. So it's not by coincidence. I think you will find that Gog does mean George. Now, if I read in the Yechezkel as an example, 38, which is talking about that Gog, the Nasi from Meshech V'Tuvel. I don't know, let's get into that a little bit here. Gog, the Nasi, what is the Nasi? Well, it means leader, more or less, but you'll find that in modern Hebrew today, Nasi is the word we use for president. So it's giving us a good hint that we're talking about a president here. But what's Meshech V'Tuvel? Meshech V'Tuvel, the most interesting thing about that is if you look at every other letter in Meshech V'Tuvel, you come out with Bush. If you look at the word that's after Meshech V'Tuvel, you'll see Bush with no letter separation exist again. So twice I have Bush encoded in there. Now, where is Meshech V'Tuvel, though? That was another thing. So I started to investigate this. I did a little bit of Googling and a little bit of Wikipedia, and I checked out where do we think Meshech V'Tuvel is. And strangely enough, there are many experts that say that Meshech V'Tuvel is Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state, but the country of Georgia. So here again, we have a very interesting thing that Meshech V'Tuvel, which are two sons, by the way, of Yephes, once again, but it's actually pointing to an area in Georgia, and the name Gog comes up again. Oh. Let's get into another little hint, and that is, if we look in Yechezkel and Zechariah, we see that there are 3 battles of Gog and Magog. Now, that's an interesting one, because what are the actual 3 battles? The best answer that we can come across is from the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim, who passed on in the year 1933, before he did, he talked about the First World War, which at the time was called the Great War because there wasn't any Second World War yet. But he talked about that war being the first battle of Gog and Magog. He predicted that there would be a second big war 25 years after the beginning of the first, which was 1914. 1939 was 25 years later, and he was absolutely correct. As I said, he passed on in 33, so his prediction came totally true. He also told us that there would be a third world war, but that would be a spiritual war, which is also something that needs a little bit of defining. Now, it's very interesting because if you go to Parshas Shoftim, it talks about how you know something is actual prophecy. If somebody says something and it comes true totally, Hashem is telling us it came from Hashem. It didn't come from that person. So the Chavetz Chaim, is he correct about World War I, II, and III? Well, the fact that he was able to predict the beginning of World War II years before it happened, and he was able to tell us about World War III being a spiritual war, and we see that these things actually happened and are happening right now. It very much fulfills the prophecy, or the test, I should say, of prophecy that it says in Parshas Shoftim. So I think we can very much look at what Chavetz Chaim is saying as correct. Okay, but now I get into some other problems, and that is, if Gog is the name George, where in World War I do I have a George that's prominent? Well, it so happens King George V was World War I. Then, World War II, we have a King George VI. So in both wars, we do have a Gog that seems to be prevalent in the wars. World War III, I'm saying definitely that we have a King George the Bush. I just made that up. But he is the Gog that seems to be fulfilling the prophecy of World War III. One would think that these wars or these battles would be very pertinent to the Jews. So I also wanted to do a little bit of an analysis of World War I, II, and III and see exactly where the Jews came in here. What did it actually do to the Jews or for the Jews? World War I was very interesting in the sense that it was part of the seed that was planted to be able to have the Russian Revolution, which was in 1917. Now, why was that possible? Is because you had the Bolsheviks who were really looking to come in, take over, put in this communist system that would be running Russia, and by actually taking advantage of World War I, which was when the military was really somewhat devastated, the Bolsheviks figured they didn't have to worry too much about the military coming in and hurting their program. So that is what happened, and the Russian Revolution was really a good a result, we might say, of World War I. Why is that important to us? Is because for 70 years after that, Russia and all the other countries that would actually be incorporated in the Soviet Union were totally against Judaism. Judaism became a thing that was verboten. It was forbidden completely. Reason being is because a communist nation really is something that says that any type of faith system is really illegal, that the ruling party is to some extent the deity that everybody is supposed to follow, and not any god or religion was completely wiped out when the Soviet Union came in. World War II, I don't think I have to get into too much about the devastation for the Jews. It was absolutely ridiculous that here you had this guy Hitler who came in and wanted to wipe out the Jews worldwide. And one would say, well, he just was working on Europe. But it's an interesting thing. After 45, when he was no longer around, it was discovered that he actually had maps. I saw these in the 1950s, that he had maps of the entire world showing exactly where all the concentration camps, let me change that, the death camps were going to be built to take care of all the Jews. Of course, he also wanted to take care of the gypsies, he wanted to take care of other minorities, and it would have been quite devastating. He was only interested in the Aryan race, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. I'm not one of those, obviously. So, if there was a map showing all the different places that he was planning to do death camps, I was living in the Philadelphia area at the time, me and my family, where would I have gone? It turns out the map showed a very, very large Auschwitz-type death camp to be built in East Brunswick, New Jersey. And that would have taken care of the Philadelphia, New York area, possibly even big enough to include places like Baltimore, Boston, Washington, who knows. The point is, Hitler really had the entire world covered so far as how he was planning to kill all the Jews. A very interesting thing about World War II too, also, is the fact that there was a problem for Hitler. He did not have the money, he did not have the ammunition, he did not have the any facilities. He had almost nothing to be able to do this big war. So somebody came along to help him. Why? Somebody who was really looking to make a lot of money off of both sides, both Hitler and the United States. Who was this individual? Oh, a man named Prescott Bush, Gog Bush's father. I think you will find that the Bush family has been very, very instrumental in a lot of the evil that has gone on in this world, especially in the 20th and 21st century. So just an extra little word that I thought I'd throw in there. An interesting thing about World War II also was that Hitler was so intent upon destroying the Jews and anything that belonged to the Jews that the Northern Africa campaign that General Rommel was running, where he was going across the Sahara Desert, going in the direction of Israel, what was the purpose of that? Of course, it was Palestine at the time, but we won't get into that one. It turns out that Rommel actually had instructions from Hitler, Yamach Shemai, that you should go and knock down the wall. The Western Wall, which was the sacred place for all Jews, the holiest place that we have until we get a temple back again. Rommel had the instructions to go knock down that wall. But there were two things that happened that prevented him from doing that. And we could actually say they were acts of God, more or less. One was the fact that there was a tremendous amount of a sandstorm that came along and devastated the soldiers. It was not possible, obviously. It was winds that came up from Hashem, and he decided that he was going to stop the army. But it was even more miraculous because Rommel wasn't even there at the time that his army got devastated. Rommel was being called away to Berlin. Why? Because his wife just turned 50, and they had a big surprise party for her, and they wanted Rommel to be there at this big 50-year-old birthday party for his wife. Of course, one would say, yeah, okay, what's that have to do with Hashem? Hashem is the one who made sure that she was born 50 years before. He takes care of all that side. So anyway, those two events really is what curtailed Rommel from being successful in knocking down the wall. I said the war. The wall, yes. Anyway, World War III, the spiritual war. When did it actually start? When can we say that the spiritual thing started and continued to devastate us for many years? I think you will find one of the biggest turning points was the Oslo Accord. Well, where did that come from? Oh, it came from Gog Bush. Gog Bush had his Secretary of State, old Baker, James Baker, draw up this plan where Israel would just have to give up land for peace, which was the most ridiculous thing that anybody would ever think of, because Israel doesn't have that much land. So to give up land for peace, we found out later on how successful that was. Look at Gaza, how successful that was. Anyway, or southern Lebanon. We gave away our buffer zone in southern Lebanon. It doesn't work. We gave away the Sinai, which allowed a staging area for them to bring in all these rockets and everything into Gaza. So we know that this two-state solution is a farce. It absolutely would not work. But where did it come from? That's the point. It came from Gog Bush, and believe it or not, Gog, with his cabal, his evil group, is really the ones who have been trying to get Israel to give up land and to help out these poor Arabs that live in Israel who don't even belong here. So we have a situation where everything that's going on seems to stem from the same source, and that is Gog and his crowd of evil people, if you want to call it that. I should also mention that everything that's going on in Israel, the intifadas that we had, the terrorist activity, it's all really stemming from the same exact spiritual war that was started by Gog with the Oslo Accord. Why? Is because as long as the world is giving credit to the Arabs and making them feel as though, oh yes, we are occupying their land, they have a good reason to go ahead and do terrorist activity, intifadas, and any other nonsense that they can come up with. The more important thing for the Gog cabal is they're really using this as a good excuse to try to start World War III. Why? Well, I've talked about this before, or I've written about it, the idea of the New World Order. Gog Bush, who is very, very instrumental in trying to get the World War III started, that would facilitate his New World Order being put into place. Interesting thing is that the New World Order, once again, would be a communist government, a one world government with a one world currency, and that communist government would, like World War I brought in the Soviet Union, would eliminate any possibility of Judaism. It would be a big, big stab in the heart for Judaism, and that's exactly what we're talking about in saying it. It's a spiritual war. They're trying to do away with that. But Gog's real purpose of this is to take over. That he wants to be the head of a government, and it would be the global elite. It would be the richest people in the world, the richest leaders in the world, and they would be the ones who would actually own the world. It would be a communist government that we're talking about all the people left in the world would be slaves to this communist government. That would be our deity. That would be the people, Chas v'shalom, that we would actually be having to completely satisfy, work for, do everything for, and they would reap all the benefits. A communist government means that we wouldn't even own anything. Our clothes, our food, our homes, everything like that would all be owned by the global elite, the rich. Besides the Cabal, we're also talking the Bilderberg Group. This all stems from, it's very long history, from the Illuminati, which is actually, if you really want to get down to it, not a religious group, but it's a satanic worship. And that's a weird thing completely, because we are talking, and it hints to this in the Bible, is the fact that Gog is not really one of faith. Gog is one who is satanic in nature. Now, the Bushes have a very interesting history, and if you go back to Yale, you would find that they were involved in the Skull and Crossbones satanic worship. It was an organization that they were part of, and Gog Bush Sr., when he was in Yale, he even had a nickname. What was it called? Oh, Magog. He was called Magog during that. Just another little hint here and there. There's so many little hints that I'm not going to go into, because this could really get into a lot of time, which it's doing it already. An interesting thing is the fact that the Bush family has been involved with this for many, many years, trying to see what they can do about getting a new world order. Unfortunately, the new world order would also require that the world population would be brought down to a manageable 500 million. Now, what does that mean? That means that they're really looking for a war here that would kill off 93% of the people of the world. If they don't sound mean to you, they sure do to me. And where is this even written in stone? Well, oddly enough, it's at the Georgia Guidestones. Remember, I did that. I was on 11 September 9/11, 1914. I did a post, and it was showing you a picture of this monument that's in Georgia, of all places. There's another Gog. And that guidestone is talking about the 10 different things, and it's in 10 different languages too, that they are trying to accomplish to bring in this new world order. It's very evil. We can honestly say also that the Bush family has been very instrumental. By the way, they're very good friends with the Bin Laden family, and they've been instrumental in bringing in things, groups like Al-Qaeda. In the 1980s, it was really Vice President Gog Bush Sr. who did bring in his friend Osama bin Laden, and they started this group called Al-Qaeda. Why? It was for fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. So, okay, it was somewhat successful, but at the same time, the Al-Qaeda went off to be a very dangerous terrorist group that went on and on and on, until recently, within the past couple of years, they've changed their name. They've broken off into another organization, still being funded and still being trained more or less by the United States of Magog. That's what I affectionately call it. What's the new group called? ISIS. Yes, ISIS. There are many, many signs in the U.S. budget, actually, that they are being funded and trained by the United States of Magog. So it's just another little area of evil that has been going on. It's weird, you know. I'm not going to get into the whole thing with 9/11, which was also a big plot that came about by the Gog Bush family. They completely planned it and caused it, and that I have many, many hours of proof to show that that's the case. Why did they want to do that? Well, for one thing, to make a lot of money, because that was a good excuse. They're trying to get World War III started. It was a good excuse to go into Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, why Iraq? Iraq had nothing to do with it. Iraq had these beautiful oil fields that Vice President Cheney at the time, he happened to own this big company called Halliburton, and he decided that would be a good idea for me to be able to take over the oil fields, make lots of money, and that's what they did. Afghanistan, what's the big deal about Afghanistan? Well, it turns out that Afghanistan in the north has big opium fields. The CIA is actually in the opium business and makes approximately $500 billion a year on opium. We could thank the Bush family for a lot of things. It's the most amazing and most evil family that has been around. I have a video that I'm not going to bother to put on here, but it shows that right now Bush is considered one of the richest families in the world. But not enough. They're greedy, and they want more and more and more. And they don't care if they kill off 93% of the people of the world in order to get their more and more and more. So, I do want to give you a word of encouragement, and that is the plan for the New World Order is running into problems. I'm happy to say Hashem is creating all kinds of chaos in the world with the weather, with other things, and turning people against each other. There's a very big thing in the Torah is the fact that we know Esav has been trying to kill Yaakov for thousands of years, and he has not really been that successful. Probably the biggest effort came about in World War II, because that was really Esav trying to kill off Yaakov. But it says in the Torah that when Esav saw that he couldn't kill his brother Yaakov, he married the daughter of Ishmael, and he said, "You do it." And that's exactly what we're facing now, is the fact that Esav is not an enemy of Ishmael, even though they really do hate each other and they fight each other. But you will find that Esav is really trying as much as possible to get Ishmael to kill off Yaakov. And that's what we are seeing right now. But the good news is, yes, there may be a war that's going to come up, but that war is going to be very short. Many rabbis are saying that it's going to be not last too long, just a matter of minutes maybe. Why? Because Hashem is going to step in and clean it up and finish it off. How is he going to do that? Well, we know that there are many places in the world that earthquakes, volcanoes, there's tremendous amount of areas that are unstable and ready to go. And it's almost like Hashem has them all prepared and ready for this devastating end that's going to come about. Interesting thing is, the end is not going to be random. There is no such thing as random. Hashem is going to use this as a way of doing away with all the evil in the world, and the righteous will thrive. The righteous won't even be affected by it. Definitely, there's no doubt about it that the people in Israel, the Jews in Israel, will be the safest ones of all, because there probably will not be any tremendous devastation. There may be some here, because there are people here that Hashem would like to wipe out, like all the Arabs, like the Arab, for instance, too. Even the people who are running the government are not following the ways of Hashem. All this is going to be sorted out, and I think we're really very close to this day of judgment, more or less. So, but the good news is, anyone who is following the ways of Hashem is going to find that Hashem is interested in you surviving and thriving. Anyone who doesn't follow the ways, when the war comes up, when the devastation comes up, natural disasters, as they like to call them, acts of God, whatever you want to call it, doesn't make any difference. Hashem is going to clean it up. He's going to purify the world, and we are going to be left with a world that is going to be the world of truth, and all this chaos and all this devastation is all going to be finished and gone. One more thing that I want to mention, because I think this helps solidify the idea that Gog means George, is there are many other Georges that come into the picture. I've already mentioned about World War I, II, and how King Georges were involved in that. But I said also that Magog means from George. And what does that mean? Well, it's an interesting thing that the country itself, the United States of America, has the father of America is George Washington. So it is really saying that the U.S. is from George. It's from George Washington. And just so happens that's also the name of the capital. Very interestingly enough. There's a lot of other hidden messages in this, and I'm not going to go into it. But you also have people who are saying that, right now the world is in such a 1984 state, an Orwellian type world that we live in right now. Well, I don't know if you know who Orwell was. George Orwell. That's another George that comes into the picture. We're living his dream to some extent as the way the world's going to be. If you go into the financial world, you'll find another interesting thing, because there's a particular individual who is really helping to devastate the world economy and do all kinds of shenanigans, and that's a guy named George Soros. So Gog is popping up all over the place. But I have one more individual that I wanted to talk about, and that is a guy named, I'm going to see if I can put it on the screen here, George Bergoglio. Now, isn't this interesting? Here I'm talking about somebody here, I think I have it down here somewhere. This guy has his first and his last name with Gog in it. Wow, this is really a Gog type person. And this individual also has been very, very involved in the spiritual war, because for one thing, he has done a lot. His sympathy for the Arabs in Israel has been absolutely sickening, devastating, whatever you want to call it. The other thing that he has done has been to try to see what he can do about stealing certain land and certain property that is in Israel that he would like to have for himself, or actually his organization. Is this a powerful individual that I'm talking about here? Well, let me let you in on a secret. George Bergoglio that's the real name of Pope Francis. And the present Pope, who's in Rome and trying to do all these horrible things to Israel, and there's no hiding it, is Pope Bergoglio. I think I've said enough. I think this is maybe gave enough examples of everything. What I'm trying to do more than anything is to let you know that this is not my opinion, but we have so many signs that Hashem is giving us his opinion. I don't mean to confuse you with the truth here, but it looks like Hashem is telling us very definitely that Gog means George, and that we're talking about particular individuals that just fall into place as hidden and not so hidden in scriptures that are saying that Gog and Magog are George, Gog Bush, who is the most prominent of the evil people running the cabal that's causing everything to happen these days, and Magog is the country that he's using, the powerful nation that he's using to try to accomplish his evil mission. Give this some thought. If you don't agree with some of the things I said, all I ask you to do is what I did. Research it. Go into Google, go into Wikipedia, go into anything you want. Go to the library. You probably have heard of something like that. But they actually have books on the subject. And when you start to look at this stuff, and you'll start to see that the idea of just guessing, well, who is Gog and who is Magog? Hashem has given us enough information that we know who it is, and we just have to now not honor Amalek, but really try to eliminate him. And that's one of the things that I'm looking for here. Let's not violate the Torah by saying, well, I'm going to not give credit to an evil person for being something. Let's pick out the right person and make sure that we take care of business the way it's supposed to be. Hashem wants us to eliminate Amalek, not honor him. Have a good evening.